Hello, and welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all our listeners all over the world. In honor of today's celebrations, we're setting sail across the Atlantic to explore a fascinating and often overlooked layer of witch trial history. Today, we are seeking out the deep transatlantic connections between colonial New England and Ireland, specifically linking key individuals to the 1692 Salem witch hunt. We also would like to offer an important thanks to Katherine A. Hermes and Beth M. Caruso, whose article, Between God and Satan, Thomas Thornton, Witch Hunting, and Religious Mission in the English Atlantic World, 1647-1693, this article was foundational to today's episode.
When we think of the Salem Witch Trials, we usually picture a very localized crisis in Essex County, Massachusetts. But to truly understand the intellectual and theological foundation of the magistrates and ministers who drove the Salem Panic, we need to look at what was happening in Ireland a few decades earlier.
The story really picks up during the 1650s, a time when Oliver Cromwell ruled as Lord Protector of England. He's famous for demanding his official portrait include warts and all. Today, a lot of historians remind us we need to look at and expect both good and bad qualities when we're reflecting on the past. Looking at this transatlantic history certainly reveals blemishes. Cromwell had a lot of support in the American colonies, with some colonists even traveling back to England, specifically to fight in his forces.
Cromwell's military conquests heavily impacted Ireland, leading to a dynamic transatlantic exchange of Puritans and ministers. Many of the reformers who had previously gone to New England because they wanted to get away from persecution in England, they saw this new English Commonwealth under Cromwell as an opportunity. So they actually went back across the Atlantic to help establish this Puritan society in Ireland.
And the men who made this journey were not minor figures. They were some of the most influential male minds of early New England. Take the Mather family. Brothers Samuel, Nathaniel, and Increase Mather were all in Dublin during the Cromwellian period.
While studying at Trinity College in Dublin, they were under the tutelage of a man named Samuel Winter. Winter was the provost of the college and a conservative, independent pastor who fiercely defended infant baptism and adopted the New England way of church membership.
At the exact same time the Mathers were in Dublin, another critical figure, Thomas Thornton, was also in Ireland, preaching at various military garrisons.
Thomas Thornton has a tragic and fascinating backstory that links him to almost every major witchcraft event in early New England. He was originally a tanner from Windsor, Connecticut, and his next-door neighbor was Alice Young, the very first person executed for witchcraft in the American colonies in 1647. That same year, a brutal influenza epidemic swept through Windsor, and Thornton lost 4 of his children, including his pious 11-year-old daughter, Priscilla. And Cotton Mather would go on to write about Priscilla Thornton in his work Magnalia Christi Americana, A History of the Church in America, as he used her as an example of piety and humility and being brave in the face of death because you know you have grace. You have this tight-knit group of Puritan thinkers marinating in the cultural and theological environment of 1650s Ireland, engaging in intense debates over things like infant versus adult baptism. But then the political wind shifted drastically. In 1660, King Charles II was restored to the English throne.
Because of this, many nonconformist ministers were formally forced out of their positions in Ireland and England. There was a whole wave of ejected ministers Prominent clergymen migrated to Massachusetts Bay Area, including James Allen, John Bailey, Charles Morton, and Thomas Whaley.
When they arrived in New England, they reconnected with Thomas Thornton and the Mather family, forming an elite transatlantic network of clergy. Historians today view this transatlantic group as a vital missing link in understanding the intellectual foundation of the Salem witch trials.
The time they spent in Ireland profoundly shaped how they would impact New England's religious landscape and their beliefs about the invisible world and how it interacts with the visible world. In English witch trials, the focus was often on maleficium, property-based witchcraft like cursing crops or killing livestock. But the Protestants in Ireland held intense beliefs focused much more on demonic possession.
When these ejected ministers brought this specific theological lens back to Massachusetts, it directly influenced how New Englanders interpreted strange afflictions. We see this play out tragically in the 1688 Boston witchcraft case of Goody Glover. Goody Glover was an Irish Catholic immigrant whose primary language was Irish Gaelic.
Cotton Mather held intense religious and ethnic prejudice and bias against her. She was an impoverished widow. She was very vulnerable. She was outside the Puritan idea of a scriptural family, and she was outspoken. Mather dismissively called her an ignorant and a scandalous old woman in his writings.
He even weaponized her Irish heritage and language against her. During interrogations, Mather complained that she spoke to him in Irish, a language he didn't understand without an interpreter. When she spoke to him about her Catholic saints in Gaelic, Mather changed those words. He claimed that the Irish word also meant spirits, and that she was really talking about demonic familiars, evil spirits.
It was pure theological confirmation bias. Her confusion in court, which was likely due to the extreme language barrier, sheer terror, was interpreted by Mather not as a lack of comprehension, but as deliberate blasphemy. He used her to validate his own theological worldview, deliberately contrasting her lowly status with the supposedly pristine piety of the afflicted Goodwin children, her alleged victims, to awaken the religious fervor of his followers against her guilt.
This network of Irish connected ministers mutually reinforced each other's beliefs about Satan actively plotting against the godly. When the terrifying fits and accusations began in Salem Village in early 1690, the same group provided the theological backing that validated the panic.
They were active participants. Charles Morton, one of the ejected ministers from Ireland, had already co-signed Cotton Mather's 1689 publication on witchcraft. And as the Salem Panic gained momentum in March of 1692, Morton, along with fellow ejected ministers James Allen, John Bailey, and Mathers, endorsed Reverend Deodat Lawson's inflammatory sermon in Salem Village.
Lawson's sermon essentially threw gasoline on the fire by validating that the devil was physically assaulting the community. Having the endorsement of this elite educated group of transatlantic ministers gave the Salem magistrates all the theological permission they needed to aggressively pursue the witch. Thomas Thornton also moved to Boston in 1692 and joined Cotton Mather's congregation right in the middle of the Salem crisis. In the following year, Thornton stood at the bedside of a young woman named Margaret Rule, who claimed to be assaulted by 8 cruel specters. Thornton endorsed Cotton's version of the events, claiming he had even seen the girl levitate above her bed.
Thornton's lifetime of experience with witchcraft, and remember, he was the neighbor of the first woman hanged for witchcraft in the colonies. This experience made him incredibly valuable to the Mathers. In his 1693 book, Defending the Salem Witch Trials, Wonders of the Invisible World, Cotton Mather directly cited the advice of credible Christians yet alive, who remembered witchcraft plots from 40 years prior. a possible reference to Thornton's memories of Alice Young in 1647.
It's fascinating that this Irish connection also brought a level of skepticism to the witch trials. During Thornton's time in Ireland, there were actually only 2 recorded witchcraft cases, and the local culture generally did not accept the concept of specters.
Because of that background, there is evidence that some of the ministers ejected from Ireland actually began to question the court's acceptance of spectral evidence during the Salem trials, which we know in the end Increase himself did.
The legacy of these men is incredibly complex, but there is no denying that the transatlantic pipeline between Ireland and New England was a crucial intellectual foundation for 1692.
The ties between the two regions were humanitarian too. During the devastating King Philip's War in the 1670s, Christians in Ireland actually raised funds and provisions to assist the suffering New England colonists. Nathaniel Mather organized this effort in Dublin, and the financial aid was distributed to Plymouth Colony.
It really highlights how intimately connected these two seemingly distant worlds were in the 17th century. To understand Salem, you really have to look at the wider Atlantic world, and that includes these deep foundational ties to Ireland.
And if Goody Glover is still on your mind, she still has not had her name cleared by Massachusetts General Court, and the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project is currently working on her exoneration. If you would like to support having her name cleared, sign her petition at change.org/witchtrials.
Have a great St. Patrick's Day and a beautiful tomorrow.